Rocky Marciano a mobbed-up fighter? It's hard to say. Very inconclusive. And would it be any more than anybody else who was in that era? Again, hard to say.
He's a no-nonsense fighter. He could come forward, punched very hard, very, very hard.
The Rock's fighting style was relentless pressure and unbelievable conditioning that he never ran out of gas. And he was willing to take a few punches so he could give one. Harry Haft said fighting him was like fighting an airplane propeller.
I don't know if he was human. He was part something else, though. Relentless, didn't feel pain, tireless, and super strong. You know, he was only about 180 pounds, 185 pounds for a lot of those fights. So if you want to get an idea how great he might have been, like in today's era, you'd have to match him theoretically with Bob Foster, Michael Spinks, Roy Jones. Then you get an idea of how brutal this guy was. He's just a wrecking ball is what he was.
I first met Marciano in 1951. I met him. My grandfather said he was hitting a heavy bag in Pete Mello's gym. My God, what an impression. I mean, the heavy bag was of 900 pounds. Who knows? The power this guy he generated, and I learned from that the rotation, how your rotation would throw in your punches.
He fought me in a crouch, you know. And my idea of fighting person in the crowd is right uppercuts, you know, and that's what I thought. He fought in the crouch, and I kept hitting him with right uppercuts, and it was amazing. I've knocked people out with that punch, and he just kept coming back. He swung wild punches, but he just kept coming. He was a well-conditioned fighter, yeah.
Well, it was a good fight. It was a tough fight. Yeah. Yeah. Well, they stopped my eye. He swole up an eye, and they stopped it. He could take a punch, and he can give it. Yeah. So he had to give it to him. Right. He was a tough guy.
A one-dimensional fighter, but his power, and as we know in boxing, power means a lot. You know, if you one shot, he catch you, he put you out. And he had a pretty decent chin. He got dropped a few times throughout his career and got up every time. So, tough guy. Very tough.
He won 20 fights then, and when he fought me, you know, and they were all knockouts. Every one of them was a knockout, you know. So I thought they were picking fights for him, you know. But I was really surprised when I got in there. I found out that he really could punch, you know.
Charles was probably the youngest one he fought out of all of them. The other guys were well past their prime when he finally... Rocky, I've always felt, was in the right place at the right time. He was just after those guys were in their prime.
So the knock on Marciano is always that he caught guys at the right time. He fought some older fighters. You know, he has a death match with Ezra Charles. Of course, he avenges that. He wins the title from, at that point, the oldest heavyweight champion of all time, Jersey Joe Walcott, and then demo jobs him in the rematch. Yeah, he beats Don Cockle, who's a Brit, you know, gets him out of there pretty good. And then, of course, he finishes his career. The last title defense, he takes on the old mongoose Archie Moore, who was, you know, anywhere from 35 to 55, depending on who you believe. And he, you know, they say that he caught these guys at the right time. He also KO'd Joe Louis. That kind of put him into national prominence.
One thing I remember my father saying all the time was that no one was ever the same after fighting Rocky Marciano. And if you look at their records, they mostly had very short careers after fighting Rocky. You paid a heavy price fighting Rocky Marciano.
The 50s, boxing is controlled by one man, and that man is Frankie Carbo, organized crime. So Carbo determines who fights who, where they fight, what they make, where they go. And sometimes he determines who wins those fights.
The gangsters came into play because they controlled the fighters. Frankie Carbo was Lucchese's soldier, was Murder Incorporated. Mr. Gray, they called him.
So that's always a cloud that hangs over that era. And unfortunately, Marciano sometimes gets caught in that conversation.
I don't think he had mob ties. Looking into Rocky's history, there's no mob ties. Any research I've done on it, I don't see anything. But listen, boxing was mobbed up. Boxing isn't a business. If it was any other business, they couldn't get it. If it was anything else, they couldn't get in there. It's a racket. Boxing's a racket. There's no ands, ifs, or buts about it.
There's a lot of money to be made. You could fix these fights. Let's face it, you bet on them, you could make a lot of money. Yeah. Of all sports, boxing is the most ideal for mob influence and corruption. You had a lot of the guys, especially back in the day, you had a lot of unlicensed managers. Rocky Marciano had Al Weil, who was a matchmaker for Madison Square Garden.
Some of the speculation why people say that Rock was connected was because of the fact his manager, Al Weil, had loose affiliation with organized crime. Again, I don't think you're in the boxing business in the 50s and you're not going to have some kind of tie to organized crime. His contract with Weil was less than advantageous as far as some of the financial incentives. It's one of those things that made Marciano, a little tight with a buck, and he was big insistent on being paid in cash.
I think Al Weil even forgot who he was supposed to be loyal to at times. It's like that Abraham Lincoln quote. No one has a good enough memory to be a good liar. And I think that's what happened to Al Weil. I think he was dealing on the left, dealing on the right, and a few times it just blew up in his face.
What did Jimmy Knapp tell him when he was, because he wanted to get rid of Al Weil?
They came to Jimmy Knapp because I was there. I was at Dempsey's the day that they wanted to make Marciano and Patterson. I heard from them that we can't step in because of Cabo. Rocky was with somebody, I don't know if it was his brother or whatever. Jimmy Knapp said, fellas, you know who we are. I can't do anything about that.
I saw a Sports Illustrated article several years ago when he turned 70. It would have been his 70th birthday. And they did an article about Rocky. And according to the article, Rocky went to go visit Vito Genovese in prison. And he brought boxing films along with him. And in prison, they sat and watched fight clips of Rocky. They spoke about boxing. And I mean, what are you going to say? Who else gets treated like that in prison?
One of the legends of that time and what's been said is that the wise guys that kind of ruled the sport in that era were so proud of the fact that he was an Italian American, he was the son of immigrants, that he was off limits. You couldn't approach him about anything. You couldn't approach his opponents about anything. Everything had to be on the level and on the up and up for Marciano's fights.
They wanted Rocky to be the symbol of America, the spokesperson, the face of boxing. So they looked out for him.
They wanted him to be a crystal clear situation. And he was that anyway. It wasn't that he had to work at it. That's how he was. He was a real legitimate guy, worried about money.
I've had my experience with wise guys. Wise guys like to be around people like that. From what I understand, wherever Rocky went, whether it was New York, Boston, all the wise guys came, they wanted him to come out to dinner with them. They wanted him to go to certain restaurants. I'm sure he didn't pay a dime for any of it. And, again, he was the heavyweight champ of the world, and before that he was a top contender. Yeah, of course they're going to, and gangsters love that type of guy. It's what they're drawn to. They feel they're that way, and meaning tough like that, and man's man.
You hear a lot of things. Rocky didn't need any help in the ring, though. I wish he would have had a longer career, 49-0. Even it was such a record that even today, 60 years later, people are still obsessed with going undefeated. Even Larry Holmes, Don King tried to duplicate the 49-0 to the point where when Michael Spinks, Larry Holmes' 49th fight was against a light heavyweight, and on this very same day that Rocky Marciano fought a light heavyweight for his 49th fight. So Larry Holmes' whole career, at least from Don King's perspective, was matching Rocky Marciano's.
His approach was absolutely relentless. So when people will quickly discount him when they look at the greatest heavyweights of all time, and his record of 49-0, which, you know, his winning percentage can't be beat, right? He can only be tied. 49-0. His title defenses, he beat Hall of Famers in his title defenses, so that's important to know. But when people just discount him and say, oh, well, he would never be able to survive in this era, in the different eras, the one thing I would always point out is that nobody could match his physical training and his physical ability, that he could just bore in and take you out with one shot.
I wouldn't put him in the top 10. Again, he was around at the perfect time. My dear friend and manager, Vinny Savino, loved him. Loved him. He says, nobody better. I never agreed with Vinny with that. Again, I think his conditioning, Rocky's conditioning, his athleticism, we can't give that. He was a very, very good baseball player, very good football player. He's a terrific athlete. But, and the other thing about Rocky is he's 5'10". Weighed 185 pounds. How could he be the best?
Where do you rank him? He was a great fighter. I fought him, then I started sparring with him all the time. I worked with him from then on. He was a nice man. He was a great guy. Yeah, he was a nice man.